he would go in, and here would be the blackboard with this huge, the Black Hole of Calcutta, to give you an idea of just how cramped and sordid and hard the conditions were. And I remember that subsequent teachers who would come in, Mr. Phillips, teaching geography or whatever, would say, "Oh no, well I can't put anything on the board. It would be a shame to disturb Mr. Ollenshore's artwork." It was held in such reverence. And to your point, he would read original accounts from that time period. And that would be it. So I mean, literally a storyteller. I mean, the whole class would be him reading from some eyewitness account of what happened, what preceded, and how terrible it was, and so forth. And to this day, I have this very vivid image of what the Black Hole of Calcutta was. And then he would read, I forget what other, but eyewitness accounts. So I mean, he obviously knew that at that age, that was something that young boys would get engaged in or follow, was the storybook aspect. I mean, it was sequential in terms of you could kind of follow it from here to there and kind of put pieces together, but it was just these vivid images that he would conjure up on the board. And then, of course, the second teacher was very opposite in many ways, which was Derek Berry, who was a Marxist historian. That was his expertise. And I think J.C. didn't realize just how subversive he was, because everything in history was a class struggle. So that's how basically DB approached it. It was like, oh, well, it was the capitalists and the workers were being suppressed and so forth. And here were all his students taking notes, all, the sons of various industrialists around the world being, subverted by DB. And then, of course, in addition to being a history teacher, he was a brilliant economist, Marxist economist, of course. And so the whole thing was, and we all did very well in our A-level economics, but it was this dedicated Marxist who was, teaching us kind of the foibles of the proletariat and what was really going on and what economics is all about.
Again, through story, because I think it was DB that told stories about, the robber barons, and I forgot the name of the journalist who exposed them, but the whole concept was that if there are horrible, there's a series called Horrible History, and apparently it's very British focused, but what a great, it's very visual, Hole of Calcutta, people lopping off heads. I mean, these are things we tend to remember.
And something we can actually not relate to, but we certainly understand. The punishment was you'd have your hand chopped off, or the Crusaders, and some of the horrors that were perpetrated by both sides.
And so, perhaps the best that we can really hope for is that the most interesting stories will be passed on, and then perhaps there will be some reason for us to start knitting together a timeline, because I have to admit that, where do you put Einstein in history? What did he witness? Or Livingston, or even Lincoln. Did Lincoln know about Marx? I would assume.
Yes. What was influencing people on the other side of the continent, or the other side of the globe, for that matter, and how did information travel? And newspapers. Where I remember being visually struck by, and actually this is very interesting in terms of how the British, in England when I was growing up, we had maps, very prominent maps in every classroom, which had basically, the British Empire was in pink for some reason, and everything else was in whatever color it was, and of course we would delight in kind of tormenting our teachers who were basically ex-army that probably went through university and therefore had some credentials to teach, saying, oh, the map's wrong, we don't have this anymore, and this is independent, and that's gone, and it's not so much pink on the map, and so forth. But there's a real bias in terms of the War of Independence, as it's taught in the U.S. In the English, it's the War of the Rebellion.
Right. And what you're talking...
Nothing independent about it was how we lost the colony.
Right. And what you're also talking about is the value of out-of-date maps, because that's part of the discussion.
Yes.
It's very helpful.
Very interesting, the history of maps. Fascinating. So Steve, the takeaway, I think, if there can be one takeaway, seems to go back to what you were saying at the outset, which is if the teacher is given the latitude and the flexibility to engage the class and or individual students in areas that are of interest to them. And I think that's one of the things that Eglon had, and I remember Fritz Koch saying that JC never sat in on a class of any of the teachers at Eglon. That once they were hired, and that was it. That they taught what they taught the way they taught it. And obviously in terms of O-level and A-level, they knew what the subject matter had to be, but the approach that they took and the way they taught and the lesson plan and so forth was pretty much of their choosing. And that may be why so many teachers stayed until death did them part, until they couldn't teach anymore and they retired, because they had that independence and flexibility that maybe is what a teacher needs. And so this is the lesson plan, and you've got to follow it to the letter.
And there was something more than the academics that was being transmitted. There was this longevity. The person who was there had been there at least 10 years.